Hey, welcome back to Gold's Garage. And if you watched my videos before, you know I'm an engine builder, and I've mentioned more than a few times how I built my second engine in 1969, 70 for Z28 Camaro E-Stock NHRA competition. And not just any 68 Z28 Camaro, this same car right here. I still own it after all these years, and that's a story for another video. However, I did mention that was my second engine. Actually, the first one, I had to build an engine to put in the car so I could drive it because I couldn't afford two cars. I couldn't even afford one car. So I built an old 307 out of a bunch of junk parts, and that got me through the winter while I was blueprinting this engine. So that's a good story so far, except what I didn't tell anybody in the previous videos is it blew up after about 20 miles, maybe a little less than 20 miles. It actually grenaded. Catastrophic failure. So, so the purpose of this video is how you can prevent things like that happening to you by following a methodical process called project management as it applies to building engines. It could be building engines, and you could take this same process and use it for renovating your wife's kitchen or your kitchen for that matter. So same idea, process, but I have kind of zoned it in to engine building. So how did that happen? We lived in Sault Ste. Marie, Canada, just north of the extreme north tip of Michigan, northern Michigan. Berger Chevrolet was one major parts supplier in Grand Rapids. The other one was Gratiot Auto in Detroit. Saturday mornings we'd leave at 3 o'clock in the morning, be at Gratiot when they opened, go to Berger Chevrolet on the way home. And Berger Chevrolet back at that time was, maybe they still are, I don't know. They were one of these GM shops they were into the Copo 427 program. They had Copo 427s all over their showroom. And they also had a speed counter just for high performance parts, racing, that sort of thing. And they were my provider of parts. So that's all a good story. How come it blew up? Well, I'm going to show you how you can prevent it from blowing up first by following a process, and then come back to the end and sort of damage analysis, damage control, what the heck happened, what went wrong, and how did I fix it in the end. So why follow a process of project management? So here's a few bullet points. Now I'm going to use my cheat sheets here. Mike's going to put a screenshot. There's actually 4 pages up while you're following along, and if you want to follow along using that, you can do that. Hopefully it'll make sense to you. So things to avoid by project management: cost and schedule overruns. Anybody familiar with that concept? Disappointing results, not getting the result you want. Do-overs, having to do it again. Failure to complete a project, never gets done. Wasted resources, you finish it and you got a whole bunch of parts left over that you didn't need or didn't want, whatever, now you have to get rid of them. And here's one: catastrophic failure. And this is what I had. I grenaded that engine, and I'll describe all the damage to you in the end. So, however, you don't have to do it that way. You can do it right the first time if you follow a process. Now, if you're an experienced engine builder, and lots of guys following my channel are, I get lots of technical input from guys who probably build a lot more engines than I have, then you probably know and do a lot of this stuff intuitively without thinking. And so I'm not trying to insult you by going back to basics, but if you're trying to learn from scratch and follow a process and minimize your chances of having disappointing results or a catastrophic failure, follow along. So some rules of thumb, basically, I'm going to throw out to you. First of all, when you're building an engine, luck has nothing to do with it. Don't depend on luck. You just got to do it right. The rules of physics are always obeyed. When mechanical parts smash into each other, they break. It does damage and cost money, and that'll happen to you as well. If you like taking chances, engine building's not for you. Think about maybe skydiving or something like that if you like to take chances. It's probably a smarter thing to do. Okay. Another point to make is, and that's kind of the part that makes this video harder to watch. Thinking is harder than working. Most people would rather just jump in and start working. Planning is thinking, and it's hard work, but it's free. Okay, think about that. It only takes your time. One other point is you can't just contract out your problems in life or in engine building. Dump it over the wall and just assume somebody's going to know what you want and give you what you want. You got to manage the process. You got to be involved. You can't be passive about it. You got to be knowledgeable. Do your own homework and participate in the process. So now we want to get started getting ready, or before you want to start. So you've heard me say plan, 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 and yeah, it sounds boring, but it works. So as I just said, planning is free, mistakes are expensive. Experience is expensive. And if you put your work into the planning at the front end of the project, you'll have less chance of having, your expensive experiences. Okay? So if you're going to do a project, let's say we're talking about an engine, so you need to have what's called a desired outcome. What do you want the end result to be? And it has to have a few elements. What do you want to achieve? How much is it going to cost? And how long is it going to take to do that? And how are you going to do it? So one example is I want to build a pump gas streetable engine to make 400 horsepower and so much torque. Dodge, Ford, Chevy, Honda, BMW, whatever, doesn't matter. The logic applies, okay? And I want to do it in X number of months. So you have to put a time element in there and a cost element, and you want to build it for however much money that you want to spend on that. That's your starting point. Okay, so that's page 1. So the 3 things it's going to capture your desired outcome: what you will do, how much it will cost, and how long it will take. So if you're going to do that, once you've defined your desired outcome as I described, the next thing you're going to do, you're going to design your own engine. And you're not going to design the casting or anything like that, but you're going to design the engine to determine the desired outcome. Because unless you're building an OEM engine, you're just replacing OEM with OEM parts, putting it back together as per the manual. You're not designing that engine, somebody did that for you. But if you're modifying it and you're going to change the parameters under which it operates, you're going to be designing your engine. So what are the considerations? First is the application. Is it a street engine? Is it a circle track engine? Is it a drag racing engine? How are you going to apply it if it's a street engine? What kind of vehicles are going into? How much does it weigh? What gear ratio does it have? What torque converter does it have? All those things have to be taken into consideration. And then you determine how many cubic inches you're going to need, how much torque and horsepower you're going to have, what your RPM is going to be, compression, static, and dynamic. You need to know that in advance. Are you going to run on pump gas or race gas? If you're not, then you want to run on pump gas. Then you need to use a limitation in your cranking pressure, dynamic compression. But you want to use all that up. You want to use as much of it as you can to get the most performance, without going too far. So you need to match your camshaft with your compression ratio. If you have a big cam, you need lots of compression. If you have lots of compression, you need a big cam. And then you have to match it with your airflow of your cylinder heads and your intake manifold. There's no use installing a cam that works good at 700 valve lift if your heads don't flow after 500 valve lift. So you have to take all those kind of things into consideration. Oil pressure should be a given, but you need more or less, you need more volume, all those kind of things. Fuel requirements. Is it a pump gas engine or a race gas engine? Once again, I think I covered that off. So how do you how do you manage to do all that? Because this is a part of the biggest part of it, of the job. And often on these kind of projects between Mike and Alec and I, we spend, between the three of us, I'm sure we spend a lot more time doing this than I spend actually building the engine. No question about it. And that's a difficult thing if you're an engine builder. You know, who pays for that? It doesn't, in my case, it doesn't really matter, but that's one of the reasons why a lot of people don't plan, okay, for one thing. So once we've done that, research, okay, back to research. So nowadays, what I didn't have when I blew this engine up was enough information. I built it making some assumptions. I didn't have the detailed information I should have had, and I paid the consequence. Nowadays, you've got more information available than you need or want. You got the internet, you got YouTube at Gold Scratch for sure, and lots of other great channels that you can check. You can go on forums, you can go look at manuals, you can go to websites. The information for almost anything that you want to do is there. If you can't find it, ask me in the comments and I'll give you my best answer. So you need to do that. Online calculators, there are, for things like calculating your compression and so on, there's online calculators. They're very reliable and dependable. They're easy to use. Summit has them. There's Wallace calculators for things like compression, dynamic compression, compression pressure, etc. So check that out and do your design, your details, so you know exactly what you're going to build and what your expectations are going to be. If you have things like desktop dyno, that's even better. Guys that have that program can, you know, change all the parameters and look at the outcomes and design pretty much exactly what they want and get what they design in the end if they follow their own process. So that's another way to do that. Okay, so you got it designed, and now you have to do the work. So the next thing you need to do is sit down and write out a detailed procedure for every step, every line item that you're going to take from when you take the hood off. Let's say you're doing your engine, when you take the hood off until you put the hood back on. If you can't write a line item for every step along the way, then you're not ready to start. Now, when you go to do that, you're going to run into line items. I don't know what to do next. Well, now's your chance to find out now before you get in the middle of the project. The next thing, for each line item, you want to list what parts you're going to need, what outside services like machine shop, what contracted services, maybe you've got to rent equipment, what parts and tools you're going to need. You need to know all that stuff now, because if you get halfway through the project, you're going to be a little disillusioned when you get overwhelmed by stuff that you didn't think about. So think about that. Parts, machine shop services, contracted labor, special tools. So the next thing is, before you make an estimate, you have to determine the price for things. Now, one of the things that's important to note is if you're going to use the contract services, I'm talking now, practical example, machine shop services. I've got a good relationship with my machine shop. They do great work. It's not an issue. I still give them an RFQ, request for quotation. And that lists, before I even go there, what I want them to do, step by step, results I want them to get, whatever terms or information or conditions I need to apply. And then I request RFQ, request for quotation. How much is it going to cost? And they reply back and give me a quotation. Okay. Then the next step is, when you go to get the work done, you don't just dump your parts over the counter and say, do whatever you have to do. You give them a detailed written description of the work. So avoid verbal instructions is the key point I'm trying to make. Avoid verbal instructions. Write it down so there's no misunderstanding. Because if there is, you're the one that's going to be your fault because you didn't tell them exactly. So And to be fair, you know, if you go back and use my experience, and you can tell me how your experience is, you take a bunch of parts to the machine shop, you leave them with them, you have kind of a discussion, do this, do that, and you pick them up. How many times when you pick up the parts, it costs less than you think? Not very darn often, right? And usually it's going to cost more than you think, because there's things that happen and things that have to be done along the way that you didn't participate in, and now you're going to own the results of it. So be clear, get a quote on what you want to do, and the best way to do it is when you give them a work order, WO, work order, to do the work as per your quote. That defines the boundaries and limitations of the work and the price you're going to pay for it. Now, having said that, things happen along the way. It's not uncommon. I get a call from Bob Atchison after I leave something there. Hey Al, we found something. Do you want to fix it, or what do you want to do about it, or whatever? That's fine. At least you participate in the process. But you can't just dump the work over the counter and leave it with somebody's discretion. I've often even, Nolan is one of the great machinists at Atchison's. I give him a written work order. You know what he says? Thank you very much. Now I know exactly what you want me to do. I don't have to guess. So that's an important point. So once you have that determined, then you need to make, you've listed all the parts that you need to make an estimate. Okay, we're on to page 3. We're getting along here. So once you do that, how do you make a good estimate? So the main things is parts, contracted labor, other resources. So on parts, if you go on the catalog, if you go on whatever catalog, you know, there's a whole bunch of them, online catalogs, etc. for parts, and look at all the parts you're going to need, get a quote, or if the parts are usually listed, how much they're going to cost, include exchange rate if you have exchange rate, shipping and handling, taxes, all that stuff. Be realistic. Don't write down what you'd like the price to be. Write down what it really is. Okay? If you do that, and you're very thorough about doing that, and you listed all the parts, and when you go to your machine shop services, you got a quote to get the work done, so you can put that in there. Now you list the price of all the parts and all the services. You total that up. If you've done a really good job, detailed job, then you still need to add 20%. It's called contingency. So what's contingency? Contingency is a line item that covers off things that you didn't think about, okay, along the way. Things that happen, things that maybe something gets broken, maybe something arrives and has to go back, whatever. There's always going to be something, trust me, no matter how thorough I am at a quote, there's always something that happens at the end. Now, if you're the other guy and you're thinking, okay, I need a short block, so I need a pistons there $800 and cranks $500. Okay, that's how much. If you do it that way, when you get to the bottom of it, you need to at least double it, because it'll be twice as much as you think. Trust me. If you do it that way, do it the right way, and you won't be disillusioned and you won't be disappointed in the end. So now you got your estimate done, you got your quotations done, and you're ready to go ahead. Now, before we get going further, I'm going to jump ahead and come back to a thing I call milestones. So milestones are points in your schedule. You've made a schedule, how long it's going to take, right? That are key points in your schedule that are significant. In other words, at that point you can stop and say, okay, I'm at this point, I've accomplished this, what do I have to do next? Maybe you have a little celebration or whatever you do, okay, along the way. So what are they? In this case, for a project like this, the planning is completed, the parts are all contracted services are all procured, we're ready to start work. And then along the way, you've got your clearances and dimensions are all done, your short blocks assembled, pistons are all in, long blocks assembled, the heads are on, engines running, engines on the dyno, engine installed in the car, we're on the racetrack, whatever. Those are all milestones along the way. And you should set points in your schedule to recognize when you've achieved one milestone, then you can start working on the next thing. So let's go back to page 3 where I was. So planning's all done. You got your schedule. All that stuff is in place. You're following the process. Now you got to do the work, right? So number one point is when you go to do the work, pursue perfection. You won't always achieve it. I don't always achieve it. I'm not perfect, but I always do my best. I'm sure everybody else that's doing this also does. Things happen, but if you pursue perfection, at least you're going to get closer to it. And if you do that, a lot of things are going to follow in line as you go. One of the next things is document, document, document. So you need to write down and document everything you do. Now, if you're handy with computers and you have Excel program or Word program, whatever, it's a lot easier because you can just type it out and revise it or whatever. And that's how I do it. It's a nice way to do it. But you don't have to have that. If you don't have that or you don't have the ability to do that, get a notepad and a piece of paper and a pencil and sit down and think it through and document. Document every crankshaft dimension, every clearance, every end thrust, torques that you use, when you did certain things. Take a lot of pictures. So back in the day, I've had this car since 1969. I have 2 pictures of it with me in it or whatever. It's all I got to show for it after all these years. Now, with, of course, cell phone cameras, pictures essentially are free. I take a lot of pictures along the way as I go during the day. Typically, at the end of the day, I will send my customer pictures of progress that's made. That's documented, and that's a great way to keep track. And sometimes I go back and look at those pictures. How did I do this? How did I do that? Where was it this time or whatever? And they're helpful. Eventually, they'll get put in a file, but they're current until that engine comes off the dyno. So refer to your plan. Don't guess or take chances. You will not get away with it. Okay, as mentioned before, building engines, you pretty much have to be perfect. I use the analogy, a good goalie in NHL, if he stops 9 out of 10 shots, he's a really good goalie. If you got 16 valves in an engine and you get 15 out of 16 in right and the other one's not, you're going to have a bad day. You got to get them all in right. So don't take chances. Don't guess. If you are in the middle of something and you're not sure, stop, figure out what's wrong, do it right. Otherwise, you're going to wake up at 3 o'clock in the morning with nightmares, wondering whether you put it together right or if it's going to blow up when you start it up. You don't need that anxiety in your life. Take time along the way to do it right. One of the comments or points that's often made, if you don't have time to do it right now, you're not going to have time to do it over again when you have to. So think about that. Refer and follow your plan. So now you got it built and you got your engine either on the dyno or test stand or back in the car, whatever. One of the things I do is project evaluation at the end of a project. Did I achieve what I tried to accomplish? Did I get it done in the time that I planned? Did I get it done for the costs that I planned? Those are the 3 main things. So one of the things that we do, as I mentioned this many times on my builds, is we do diagnostics after the engine's built. Still on the test stand, I started up on the test stand before it goes to the dyno. Pressure test it with put 15 or 20 psi in it, make sure it doesn't leak. Do a leak down and compression test, make sure the cylinders are sealed right. Make sure there's no leaks, all that kind of stuff. And when it goes to the dyno, that is the ultimate diagnostic, of course. If it performs on the dyno the way you designed it, then you've had a successful project. And as I say to my customers, I like the dyno every single engine. Some don't want to for a whole bunch of different reasons. But the dyno is the ultimate torture test. It's the ultimate diagnostic. If I comes off the dyno, and I made 10 or 12 hard pulls on that engine and it performed well, I got a nice warm feeling inside of me that I can say to my customer, as long as you keep water and oil in that engine and you don't over rev it, it'll probably last you almost forever, and it will. If the dyno is really the ultimate test for an engine, and I'm very fortunate. I live close to Daryl Waters Dyno Service. We work great together, and I dyno almost every engine. It's a reasonable cost, very effective way to do. And you know, when we go to do the dyno, we kind of have it private, all to ourselves, so we're not competing with anybody else, and we can do a thorough job of it. So that's the ultimate, and I always recommend for every build that we do a dyno test. So back to how the heck, if I'm so smart, how did I blow up my own engine? So here's how it happened. So 1969, I bought this car in 68, and at the end of 69, I took the engine out, the blueprint. I did drag race it in 68, just the way it kind of came. And I took the engine out, the blueprint it, and once, I think I mentioned, we bought parts from Berger Chevrolet in Grand Rapids. So for E-stock back in the day, 302 Z28, basically get the NHRA rule book. So the way I understood it anyway, and maybe I didn't understand it as well as I should. And did I call it a Z28? Okay, so if you live south of the 49th parallel, let me get that in there. My apologies. It's a Z in the United States. It's a Z in Canada. It's a Z most places in the world, but it's a Z in the United States. Most of my viewers are in the United States, so we can call it a Z28 if you want. Anyway, back to that. So one of the things that through Berger Chevrolet, they had a lot of good information. They balanced my engine for me. I brought it down there and had it balanced after I had it ready to assemble. And I purchased a General Kinetics camshaft for it. Now, the term I'm going to use is legal cheater. I'm sure that's not the term they use. And General Kinetics, by the way, is, I just did a little bit of homework on it. It's kind of disappeared. It got bought out. There's a whole trail of information about where it is now. Some of their work is still around. They made some pretty crazy cams back in the day, and I think my modified production car a few years later still had General Kinetics cams. Anyway, the concept of the cam, and Mike will put up a screenshot. I tried to show you the difference, and maybe I exaggerated it a bit. So the idea that we had was the lift is 485 thousandths without lash for a Z28. 455 with lash, but anyway, 485. So that defines the cam, the lobe lift on the camshaft, and the duration numbers as well. So the idea of these cams was the duration was technically the same because it started at the lift at the same point and closed the valve at the same point. But along the way, it lifted the valve a lot faster than the stock cam did, because the stock cam, as we discussed before, the OEM cams were very, very soft ramps, very, very slow ramps. So they took advantage of this by having the same lift and duration, but faster lifts. Didn't have cam doctor back in the day. If those are familiar with the cam doctor, I know what it is. Our circle track car gets put on the cam doctor at least once a year. And so that would have certainly shown that, but that was the concept. So, and apparently Bill Jenkins was using this cam. I don't know if he was. He was shifting at 8,000 RPM. So we thought, I'm going to get that. It's going to give me a competitive advantage, and it's going to be legal. Okay, so one of the things that I didn't do the homework on and I didn't have access to information like you do today. You read the NHRA rule book, it said you have to use stock valve spring. So I used stock valve springs. I shimmed them to the stock height. And so what happened with the engine, with less than 20 miles on it, I was at about 6,600 RPM in high gear. Heard this loud crash, put my foot on the clutch, looked in the mirror and saw billows of white, blue smoke in the background as far back as it could go. What did I do? So if you have white smoke in the background, you know your water's mixed with your oil. The water evaporates, turns into steam. Now you got oily steam coming out of your headers, and that's what I saw when I looked in the background. How the heck did that happen after all the work I put into it? So what we found out is I had the engine past 7,000 RPM before that. It blew up at 6,600. But when I took it apart, one cylinder was completely gone, number 3 cylinder, the piston was broken, the block was broken, the rod was broken. Fortunately, it all stayed in the oil pan. That's the only good news I can tell you about. But we could see the valves, other valves had been kissing the pistons. And so here's where I went wrong in the process, and something I guess I didn't understand and didn't find out is because I used a camshaft with the same lift and duration, I didn't think piston to valve clearance would be an issue. Now, modern engines, my son's race engine, for example, if he used the right pistons, of course, 550 thousandths lift, 240 or 50 degrees duration at 50, piston to valve clearance is not a problem. So this was a way smaller cam. I never thought about it, and the valves hit the piston, and finally one probably broke and fell in. Now there's not much room in there for a piston to come up with a valve stuck in the engine, and that's what happened. So that's where I went wrong. I didn't do my homework, and I didn't have all the information. I was relying on somebody else's advice, and I paid a pretty big, it was not a fun summer. This was the beginning of the summer. I just started my corporate job, just graduated college, hadn't even had one paycheck yet, and it was gone before I earned it, that's for sure. So don't make that mistake. Follow the process. Once again, if you're, Brian Salter or somebody like that, or Yarda Yarda out there, lots of other guys that comment, you build engines all the time, you can do all this in your head, no problem. This is here to help guys that, that can't do it that way. Hope you found that helpful. 20,000 and counting, we're going on for 30,000. And, I just watched a video by Nick Scratch the other day. He's got over 200,000, and he deserves it. He's got great videos, and people are entertained and love to watch them. So it's going to take a long time. I don't think I'll ever catch Nick, but we'll keep digging and trying to make interesting, helpful videos as long as you keep watching, liking, subscribing, and more important than anything else, commenting. Thank you for your comments. Thank you for watching Gold Scratch.